You were wondering if Justin Trudeau was going to escalate 48 hours after both countries have expelled each other's high commissioners and top diplomats. I told you things are going to get worse, and I've been proven true, and I'll tell you just how right here on 5 Live. I'm Shiv. Thanks as always for being with me. The headlines first. 12 bomb threats to different flights in just 72 hours sparks concerns about an organized pattern of disruption. Government takes stock. Sources say sky marshals and NSG commandos to be doubled. Hoax scholars to be put on no-fly list. Mahayuti to announce seat-sharing formula in state of war Maharashtra. Fadnavis hints at Shinde as chief ministerial face. Dares the Aghadi camp to announce their chief minister face first. Omar Abdullah takes oath as the first chief minister of Naya Jammu and Kashmir. Congress, snubbed with just one ministerial berth, decides to only support from the outside. Sparks speculation of a big rift with Omar. External Affairs Minister names and shames Pakistan and China at the SCO summit in Islamabad. Calls out its terror nexus with China. Says the Pakistan-China corridor is against India's sovereignty. Bengaluru submerged once again. Heavy rainfall brings India's Silicon City to a grinding halt. Roads, IT parks inundated, apartments flooded, schools and colleges remain shut. The escalation between India and Canada has precipitated a full-fledged diplomatic crisis between the two countries. Two countries that have held diplomatic relations for many years. Two countries that share huge people-to-people contacts. Canada has one of the largest Indian expat populations, but now Justin Trudeau has made things even worse. First, I want to update you on the top developments on this rapidly progressing story. Number one, India-Canada ties are in free fall. That's clear. The top 5 developments. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau finds himself under growing pressure from within his Liberal Party to step down. Liberal Party MP Sean Casey claims that she's getting loud, clear and strong messages that it's time for Trudeau to go. It's an example of one of the things Trudeau's trying to distract from to get more traction from his domestic audience. Canadian leader and NDP chief Jagmeet Singh, a Khalistani politician who's been a very vocal supporter of terrorists, urges sanctions on Indian diplomats and calls for a ban on the RSS in the country. But Canadian journalists mock him. The video goes viral. He's been laughed off stage in his own country. What an embarrassment. The United States of America and the United Kingdom say that allegations leveled by Canada are serious in nature and India must cooperate with Canada with the investigation. Boilerplate messages as part of the Anglosphere. Australia also issues a statement amidst deteriorating India-Canada ties. Australia claims that they respect Canada's judicial process and sovereignty of all countries must be respected, but Anthony Albanese doesn't mention India. Meanwhile, Canada's spying agency is getting a new leader just as allegations of foreign interference and aggression heat up in the country. The Canadian Prime Minister's office appointed Daniel Rogers as the next director of the Canadian Security Intelligence Service, a service which has been investigated in the past for being allegedly involved in the Kanishka Air India flight bombing. The United States of America, the United Kingdom, Australia and New Zealand have backed their Five Eyes ally Canada in its allegations against India, calling almost unanimously for India to cooperate. Importantly, New Zealand and Australia have not mentioned India. The United Kingdom has, and so has the United States. The question is, does this mean a greater degree of diplomatic pressure on India to cooperate with Trudeau's diplomatic allegations against Delhi? Or is this something that India should push back on with full force? Take a look.
Trudeau's war on India is steadily escalating. 48 hours after India and Canada took relations to an all-time low, there's suspense over where things will go next. While India has aggressively responded to Trudeau and expelled the top leadership of Canada's High Commission, Trudeau will find at least a little solace in the support he's getting from the Five Eyes, an intelligence coalition of Caucasian nations. The strongest support, unsurprisingly, came from the United States.
We have made clear that the allegations are extremely serious, and they need to be taken seriously, and we wanted to see the government of India cooperate with Canada in its investigation. Obviously, they have not chosen that path.
America's placeholder support may come off as alarming, but it's fully on expected lines, considering that Trudeau is unlikely to have declared such a high-level diplomatic war without a sign-off from Washington. Also, the United States has itself clearly signalled that it sees Khalistani separatist terrorists on its soil as intelligence assets against India. But it isn't just the US that Trudeau needs to burnish his diplomatic war against India. Caught in conflict with an assertive Modi government, the Canadian Prime Minister has been dialing leaders of the other nations under what is seen as the White World's espionage club. New Zealand backed Canada, but with caution, even refusing to name India in its statement. The Australian Prime Minister also issued a statement, but held off on naming India. The United Kingdom also issued a statement, but mentioned India, saying the government of India's cooperation with Canada's legal process is the right next step. 3 of the Five Eyes members are also part of the G7 economic grouping. That's where the sanctions talk comes in too. Though Canada risks billions of dollars in trade if the conflict with India snowballs, there's the Five Eyes that the Trudeau government would like to leverage as the issue takes a turn for the worse. Bureau Report, India Today.
Joining me live now is Michael Rubin, Senior Fellow with the American Enterprise Institute. You've seen him on India Today before. Mr. Rubin, thanks very much for your time. Good to have you on India Today at a time that we're reporting an important story. Right off the bat, Mr. Rubin, I'd like to quote the title of a column that you did on an Indian platform yesterday, where you said India should designate Canada as a state sponsor of terror. Why do you think that should happen at this time?
Well, you know, Shiv, the basic problem right now is that many people don't know the depth of this issue. They don't know about Khalistani extremism, and they don't know about the double standards in which Canada is engaged. Let's put terrorism aside. The United States has designated in the past Cyprus and Armenia as states of money laundering concern. And rather than react with opprobrium, what they did is they did a deep dive into their own behavior and they removed themselves from that list. If India is serious about Canada, and Canada is being a soft spot for terror finance, a safe haven for Khalistani extremism, then make the designation on objective factors, and then Canadian and Indian diplomats can meet to discuss a roadmap for Canada removing itself from the list.
But don't you think, Mr. Rubin, that if India chose to designate Canada as a state sponsor of terror, wouldn't it logically need to do the same with the United States, which is virtually unthinkable considering what the United States has done with a designated terrorist like Gurpatwant Singh Panu?
Yes and no. When it comes to Canada, Canada's behavior with India has been very different than the United States' behavior with regard to India. There's been much more coordination and cooperation, and if I may, seriousness behind the scenes between India and the United States in order to address the problem of Khalistani extremism. The Indian consulate in San Francisco has been attacked twice, and the United States has been working with India with regard to this and understands the broad context of the Panu issue. Air India 182 was bought brought down by Khalistani terrorists. There really has been no difference between Najjar and Osama bin Laden, in which the United States went into Pakistan, into Abbottabad, to kill him. So I think the different behavior within the United States and Canada merits the difference.
Can you help us understand, Mr. Rubin? Because, of course, it is understood that diplomacy is often complicated. There are many layers to relationships between countries. But the Indian public watching this story on India Today right now is wondering why the United States is doing this, why the United States has taken a specific aggressive stand as far as Khalistani separatists is concerned, something that obviously harms India. Can you help us understand that, especially at a time when India and the US are seen to be coming closer in virtually every other way?
Well, Shiv, it's a great question, and you point out some of the hypocrisy of American actions. What I would say with regard to Matthew Miller, the National Security Council spokesman's comments, as you said, they were rather boilerplate. I say as an analyst rather than as an advocate, my read of this is that the Biden administration much rather concentrate on Russia and Ukraine, on Israel and Lebanon, Israel and the Palestinians, and is looking at the Justin Trudeau temper tantrum with regard to India as an unnecessary distraction. So when I look at the statement which I saw, I see an effort by the United States to kick the can down the road until the Biden administration ends and they don't have to deal with this anymore. But you know what? India can flip the narrative on Canada. When it comes to cooperating with the investigation, at issue is whether Canada is going to be able to interrogate Indian diplomats, Indian officials. Well, why doesn't India say, this problem started in 1985 with the bombing of Air India. We want to interrogate Canadian intelligence. We want to interrogate the ministers who allowed Najjar to come in illegally as a criminal and then normalize his application. We want to talk to Justin Trudeau directly to see how much of this is political, how much of this is due to the legacy of his father. The story didn't start with Najjar's death. The story started decades before, and India needs to make that clear directly and aggressively.
Do you think that there are other options or other actions that India could proactively take vis-a-vis Canada at this time? We heard the Foreign Minister of Canada, Mr. Rubin, say that everything is on the table, including economic sanctions. One cannot immediately read the likelihood or the possibility of any of those actions being taken. Things are as bad as they are already. But do you believe India should go ahead and take some steps anyway?
Look, the way I look at it is this, Shiv. India is a major power in the world states. It's the world's most populous country. It's the world's largest democracy. Yes. Canada can't treat it like a servant. Canada can't treat it like a water boy. The fact of the matter is, India is making very clear what the consequences would be, hoping that Canada would back down, because make no mistake, what Justin Trudeau is doing isn't a matter of principle. It's a matter of his own cynical political calculations. Much of what motivates Justin Trudeau appears to be a desire to deflect, to distract from the fact that he is 10% behind in the national polls heading into an election. The role of India isn't to be there for Canada's political convenience, and that's what India needs to make clear to all Canadians.
I completely agree. In fact, my show yesterday did focus on the fact that this appears to be a big distraction from the many domestic issues that Trudeau faces right now in the run-up to elections next year. One final question, Mr. Rubin, is, we've seen the statements from the Five Eyes as well. Those appear to be expected statements. It wasn't like the countries that are part of Five Eyes were going to oppose what Canada had said. They needed to put out these statements. Should India be reading anything into that, or is that just, routine?
Well, let me look at, I think it's routine, Shiv. When I worked at the Pentagon, I was a consumer of intelligence. And the way I read this is when the United States has smoking gun evidence of a pending assassination, whether it's in a friend's territory or an enemy's territory, as policy, we give a heads up. What happened with Najjar was that after the assassination, the United States said, hey, look, we can provide you with a lot of the chatter, a lot of the background intelligence, which we happen to have. I don't see any smoking gun there. If there was a smoking gun, it would have been provided ahead of time. Justin Trudeau, for his own political convenience, appears to have decided to make an accusation and then hide behind CIA secrecy, hide behind National Security Agency secrecy, Five Eyes secrecy, and that must be frustrating to no end. The intelligence professionals who don't like their technocratic services being corrupted for these political reasons. That's how I read the broader context of this situation.
Michael Rubin, appreciate your time. Thanks so much for taking my questions and helping us understand this unfolding story. Appreciate it, Michael. Thank you.
Bye.
Well, if Justin Trudeau thought that his diplomatic onslaught on India would help boost his sliding popularity in Canada, he couldn't possibly have been more wrong. And it's not us saying it, it's the Canadian public, it's the Canadian media, it's Canadian social media, it's Canadian YouTubers. Because since he triggered this full-scale diplomatic war with India, the Canadian Prime Minister is being almost unanimously mocked, derided, and ridiculed, even by people of his own party and his own political persuasion. Trudeau and his former ally, Khalistani Jagmeet Singh, are being blamed for worsening ties with India just in order to divert domestic attention from more pressing home issues. Take a look. It's unbelievable.
I think it is obvious that the government of India made a fundamental error in thinking that they could engage in supporting criminal activity against Canadians here on Canadian soil, whether it be murders or extortion or other violent acts. It is absolutely unacceptable.
Justin Trudeau's tirade against India didn't just get a fierce counter from New Delhi, but even Canadian media and think tanks have been criticizing him for making allegations without providing credible evidence and for spreading misinformation regarding the Khalistani threat. In an article published in the Canadian newspaper, The National Post, senior journalist and author John Ivison noted that Canada has allowed Sikh extremism to flourish within its borders. He further alleged that Prime Minister Trudeau has allowed diaspora politics to unduly influence foreign policy and criticized the Royal Canadian Mounted Police for making serious statements against India without providing any proof. The same view was echoed by Daniel Bodman, a senior correspondent for the National Telegraph, who noted that this could end up costing Canada billions in trade and that Trudeau's move was to appease Jagmeet Singh and the gang of Khalistani ministers.
So no one believes Justin Trudeau is telling the truth here in Canada. He doesn't have any domestic support. It's just, he is just spitting in the eye of a powerful ally. Is it domestic vote bank politics at this point? Maybe. I mean, is he so desperate to keep the record of #1 Khalistani over Jagmeet Singh? Who knows?
Trudeau is also being accused of worsening the diplomatic situation by failing to address the concerns raised by New Delhi. Trudeau's former ally and Khalistani sympathizer, Canadian MP, Jagmeet Singh, is also in the line of fire. He's being mocked for demanding sanctions against Indian diplomats. Yes, you heard that right. Against Indian diplomats, not India.
We got the RCMP that said that Indian diplomats were hiring criminal elements to shoot at Canadians. I can't see why we would do anything other than put in place severe sanctions on those diplomats, on Indian diplomats.
You're not saying that, you're leaving open that assumption.
This is the last question, if you want.
We're going to let her... He's gone.
He's gone.
Also, that's still not how it works.
Yeah.
Trudeau's desperate ploy to deflect attention from his flagging popularity and domestic politics is finding few takers even within Canada. Bureau Report, India Today.
And a population that stands to perhaps be affected the most at this time are Indian students. Nearly 500,000 Indian students study in Canada, and that number is now expected to drop drastically. The future of Indian students in the pipeline is now in limbo amidst this huge diplomatic escalation between India and Canada. Canada has long been a favored choice for Indian students seeking higher studies abroad. Will this turmoil change the course? Certainly looks like it, and that's going to cost Canada. Take a look.
Relations between India and Canada hit rock bottom. And amid this, many Indians are left wondering how the diplomatic fallout will affect immigration, work and student visas. The fallout has left Indian students and their families concerned.
अब अगर कनाडा गवर्नमेंट वीज़ा देना बंद कर देगी स्टूडेंट्स को तो वो बहुत ज़्यादा कंसर्न हो जाएगा जिनकी एप्लीकेशन स्पेशली इन प्रोसेस है जैसे हमारी ट्यूशन फीस ऑलरेडी सब गई हुई है वहाँ पे और काफ़ी सारे मेरे फ्रेंड्स हैं जिन्होंने ऑलरेडी इनटेक अपना कंप्लीट कर चुके हैं दे आर अबाउट टू फ्लाई तो अगर इनकेस गवर्नमेंट ऐसा करती है वीज़ा पे कुछ भी अगर स्टॉप लगा देती है तो बहुत बड़ा कंसर्न हो जाएगा क्योंकि ऑलरेडी स्टूडेंट्स ने GIC पे की है.
With Canada being one of the top destinations for higher education for students, many fear the diplomatic escalation will impact their future plans.
मैं सितंबर नेक्स्ट इनटेक के लिए जाऊंगी 2025 में और मैं अभी आईएलटीएस की प्रिपरेशन कर रही हूँ और मेरा स्टार्टिंग से टारगेट था कि मुझे कनाडा ही जाना है और मैंने बैचलर्स प्रोग्राम पढ़ना है और मैंने कॉलेज वगैरह भी सब ऑलरेडी शॉर्टलिस्ट करा हुआ है बट अब जैसे मैं ये न्यूज़ सुन रही हूँ तो मेरे को थोड़ा सा डर लग रहा है कि आगे क्या होगा और फ्यूचर का क्या होगा.
Parents of the students who study at Canada's universities voiced the same concerns.
ये दोनों कंट्रीज की डेवलपमेंट के लिए बहुत ही ज्यादा गलत है. कुछ बच्चे जो आगे सोचते हैं अपना उन्होंने करियर सोचा हुआ है हम वहां जाके सेट होंगे पेरेंट्स का पैसा लगा हुआ है फैमिलीज का पैसा लगा हुआ है तो ये सारी पॉलिटिकल इश्यूज के कारण ये सब कुछ स्पॉइल हो रहा है जो नहीं होना चाहिए.
Canada typically welcomes around 5 lakh international students each year, with Indian students making up nearly half of that number. Travel experts confirmed that the situation for Indian students in Canada has become more challenging.
पिछले साल से इन्होंने कुछ काफ़ी वीज़ा स्टूडेंट्स को कम देने शुरू कर दिए रिजेक्शंस ज़्यादा कर दिए शुरू. वहाँ पे उनके इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर जो फैसिलिटीज़ हैं वो बड़ी कम है जिस हिसाब से स्टूडेंट्स वगैरह लेके जाते थे 2-2.5 लाख प्लस इमिग्रेशन भी कर रहे थे 2-3-4 लाख लोग सड़कों पे रहना शुरू कर दिया अपने पंजाबी. आप पीछे मैं गया था टोरंटो गया था तो देखा वो ब्रिज के नीचे या फ्लाईओवर्स के नीचे अपने पंजाबी टेंटिंग लगा के वहाँ रह रहे हैं.
With India expelling 6 Canadian diplomats and announcing withdrawal of its High Commissioner and other officials, uncertainty shrouds Indian students and visa aspirants. Bureau Report, India Today.
And joining me live now from Ontario in Canada is Kushal Mehra. He's a popular Indian YouTuber. He's a businessman who has a very unique perspective because he spends half of his time in Canada and the other half here in India. He recently relocated to Canada to spend half his time there. So very important to have his perspective. Kushal, welcome. Good to have you here on 5 Live. My first question to you, Kushal, is what is the mood among the Indian community there in Canada? You know, I realize Indian community is a very broad term when it comes to Canada. There are many different communities that comprise the Indian community there, which is important to note, especially since we're also talking about Khalistanis, who I would refrain from calling Indians. But you get my question. What is the mood down there over this huge diplomatic meltdown?
Good evening, Shiv. Thanks for having me. Well, the mood is a mixed bag. I think there is a lot of anxiety in certain sections of the Indian community. It depends on where you go. There's a lot of anger against the current government, where as far as the relations between India and Canada are concerned, things are going from bad to worse.
Yeah.
I mean, there's no happy camper other than the Khalistanis, honestly, as of now, as far as the Indian community is concerned. And obviously, I don't consider Khalistanis to be Indian, and Khalistanis also take offense to the fact that they're called Indians. So I would grant them that. But yeah, there's a lot of anxiety right now because a lot of Indians and in Canada, they have business interests in India too. And not just business interests, just family interests. They want to go and visit their families. They want things to be normal. On top of that, multiple religious places in Canada have constantly been desecrated by Khalistani elements, and it's been going on for a while. And on top of that, considering that India, Canada now are on the verge of a complete diplomatic breakdown, a lot of members, especially of the Hindu Canadian community, they're really worried about the repercussions of that on their own families over here, because the message being sent by the Canadian government to the larger Indian community is that we will throw you all under the bus for a few Khalistanis.
You know, a lot of, the Indian public, which has been watching this story unfold, Kushal, effectively since September last year when those allegations over Niger were first leveled by Trudeau, the public here is wondering why Justin Trudeau needs to pander to this, tiny fraction of the larger, population of people of Indian origin in Canada. And whether Khalistanis like it or not, they are people of Indian origin after all. Why, in your view, does Justin Trudeau need to pander so much to them when they are so small?
Yeah, I mean, before I explain that, there's a famous line in Hindi and Punjabi, kuch shahar, I mean, I'm going to use the Hindi one, kuch shahar ke log bhi zalim the, kuch hame bhi marne ka shauq tha. So I think the reality is somewhere between that. Listen, the Canadian electoral system has been very systematically hijacked by the Khalistanis since the 1980s. I mean, I don't know how many Indians know, but the Canadians, when they decide who's going to fight in a particular constituency, which they call a riding here in Canada, they have to go through the process of a primary. And the Khalistanis have pretty much rigged the primaries of the Liberal and the NDP especially, not so much of the Conservative Party of Canada. I don't know if you know about this, Shiv, but in Canada, let's say if you came here as a tourist and there is a Liberal Party nomination election happening for a particular constituency, let's say St. John's in Toronto or any other spot, right? What if I told you you can vote for that?
Really?
So basically the entire system is hijacked, and the representation that comes to the government, especially inside the Liberals and the NDP, is only a Khalistani. And then when they talk about India, the Khalistanis pressurize them and they have a disproportionate say in affairs. Now, why does the Canadian government listen to these people? That's the reason. And then on top of that, there is a culture of intimidation. If journalists or social commentators like me, if we try to talk about this in the open, the Khalistanis even resort to violence at times. In Canada. I mean, we've had a history of attacks on Indian journalists going all the way back to Balraj Dale in Canada. And many other, Tara Singh here, Balraj Dale, and many other cases have happened where, so the community does not, take the next step of speaking against the Khalistanis because they're scared of physical repercussions. Then there are business repercussions. And Khalistanis have their plants everywhere. I mean, they have even entered some Hindu temples, by the way. Yeah, it's very hard to believe. But they're even, part of Hindu temples. And if the Hindu temples try to speak, there are repercussions there. And now the intimidation are in the form of graffiti outside the temple. It's a message being sent to everyone. So basically, I think most of the time people get scared, so they don't speak up. And the politicians only hear one side of the story from the Khalistanis, and they assume, let's just go here because they will get us the block vote, which they think is working for them.
What do you think India should do, Kushal, at this point of time? India has already pushed back very aggressively. The country has expelled the Canadian High Commissioner and 4 other people who have to leave, in a couple of days from now. That's their deadline. But as suspense remains over what the next escalation might be, and I just saw that CBC had platformed Gurpatwant Singh Panu, who is a designated Indian terrorist. What do you think India should do? Should it be sanctions on trade? Should it be something economic? What's your view?
As far as I'm concerned, I think I would like the Indian government to, first of all, make the line in the sand very clear that if you are a sympathizer of Khalistan or an actual Khalistani, you do not get the benefits of the OCI. I think we should start at that. There have been some OCIs that have been cancelled, but I think the Indian government needs to up the ante over there. As far as the trade is concerned, I mean, I heard the foreign minister, Melanie Joly, saying that sanctions are on the table. I don't know who's advising the honorable foreign minister of Canada, because I don't think she's read the trade imbalance report between India and Canada. Let's say if Canada was to sanction India and India retaliates, how does this benefit the Canadian economy? We have rising unemployment in Canada. There is increasing resentment about that. And then on top of that, the one trading partner, India is like number 9 as far as trade with Canada is concerned. So I think as of now, if the Canadian foreign minister is threatening sanctions, I think the Indian government should help them. And maybe, few trade deals should be, put on hold. I've heard from my sources in Canada that there was a business delegation from Ontario that was scheduled to visit India, the province of Ontario, which is, the premier is Doug Ford from the Progressive Conservative Party. Maybe the Indians should not trade with Ontario for a while. At the end of the day, we should grant them what they want, right?
Yeah.
So as far as I'm concerned, I guess this is what I would expect from the Indian government. Cancel OCIs, stop trade. And by the way, there are Canadian politicians of Indian origin. Khalistani origin. And they have significant investments in Punjab too. Maybe the Indian government could look into that too.
Final question, Kushal, before I let you go is, we've been reporting and, via social media, via local media reports, via Canadian influencers about how, how many scandals and problems, domestic problems currently preoccupy Justin Trudeau. And that's one of the reasons perhaps he's needed this kind of an international distraction. Give us your perspective of that, because it has to be different from how we see it from the outside. How unpopular is Trudeau right now domestically? In how much political trouble is he really?
So it's actually, I think he is the most unpopular prime minister, or one of the most unpopular prime ministers in Canadian history. Like the last I checked on the polls, his rating was like a -36 or something. I mean, I had a hearty laugh when I looked at it, because nobody is as unpopular as Justin Trudeau. And you don't have to trust me. You just have to drive around Canada and you just have to mention his name if you go to an average cafe or a restaurant, and the resentment. So just to give you a brief idea of how unpopular he is, if I remember my numbers correctly, Toronto has 24 ridings and the Liberals pretty much wiped them all out in the last election. Polls right now say the Liberals are down to 1 in Toronto, the entire Toronto region.
Wow.
That's how unpopular Justin Trudeau is. And yes, the sense in India is right. There are some people say there are around 20 MPs who want Trudeau to be removed. Some reports are saying there are 30 plus MPs who want Trudeau to be removed. On top of that, there is an actual foreign interference probe that is going on right now in Canada, where the Prime Minister's representative is supposed to speak today, if I'm not mistaken. And, this is classic Trudeau, where when the real foreign interference, which is of the Chinese Communist Party and of Pakistan, that needs to be discussed, has to be, on the forefront. You bring in the India bogey, because Trudeau, I don't know how many people noticed Trudeau's press conference. He specifically tried to segregate and separate the rest of the South Asian community and the Sikh community. Yes. These are all things that are done deliberately. Trudeau is trying to secure in his head the Sikh vote bank. And in that process, Trudeau is willing to throw the entire Indo-Canadian relationship under the, I don't know, whatever English word we want to use. He's willing to sacrifice the entire Indo-Canadian community, the entire Canadian economy, whatever is needed. And believe me, if I tell you he's unpopular, he's really unpopular.
It's incredible to report it. It's something else entirely to hear it from someone as credible as Kushal, who's in Canada right now and offers that perspective while reporting from there. Kushal, it's been a pleasure. Thanks very much. We'll bring you on board through our coverage, because this story is most definitely not over. It's going to be unfolding in the days and the weeks ahead. You'll see much more of Kushal Mehra right here on India Today. For the moment, Kushal, thanks so much for being with me. In 2020, India, the world's largest democracy, designated Gurpatwant Singh Panu a terrorist. This is a man who faces 22 criminal cases in Punjab. The Indian government has published detailed information about how Panu plays a significant role in promoting and commissioning terror acts and activities and spreading fear and terror in Punjab and elsewhere in the country through his threats and intimidation tactics. Between 2021 and 2022, Panu, who has been hiding like a rat between the US and Canada, has routinely published bounties on Indian officials and explicitly called for vigilante violence against Indian diplomats and government leaders. In 2023, this terrorist, Panu, issued a direct threat to Air India flights, warning people to stop using the Indian carrier as their life would be in danger. It was an implicit bombing threat. Deeply embarrassing the United States, a country of which he is a citizen, Panu had to embarrassedly backpedal and downgrade his terrorist venom by saying he was merely calling for a boycott of Air India, but everyone knew what this terrorist meant. By continuing to protect Panu using his citizenship as a cover, the Biden administration has clearly signaled that no matter how close India and the US become as partners, Washington will use US-based Sikh separatists on its soil as assets against India. India is playing ball with the United States, cooperating in the investigation, and even sending a team to the US for further proceedings. But now, 2 days after opening an aggressive diplomatic front against India and precipitating a historic crisis between India and Canada, the country's Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has made his next escalatory step. Canada's national broadcaster, CBC, has just done a television interview with Gurpatwant Singh Panu. Now, one can argue that Canada doesn't see Khalistani separatists as terrorists, but amidst the belligerent crossfire between these two countries, India and Canada, choosing to platform a man who implicitly threatened to bomb Air India aircraft just last year shows that Canada, or rather Trudeau, is practically flaunting his support for a designated terrorist. More significantly, it exposes what some critics perceive as Justin Trudeau's inconsistent, hypocritical approach to issues of terrorism, which seems to be shaped by political expediency and saving his own skin. By providing Panu a platform, CBC, which is the public broadcaster of Canada, has effectively legitimized the voice of a man who publishes murder bounties on government officials and threatens to plant bombs on Air India flights. Given Canada's own history with Khalistanis bombing Air India flights, one would perhaps have expected extra caution in giving voice and platform to a man like Panu. But then, like I said on my show yesterday, this isn't about terrorism or even really about Canada-India relations, but about Justin Trudeau triggering a smokescreen that can distract the Canadian public from incendiary domestic issues. As you've seen on this channel and on this show, Trudeau is facing a huge public crisis and is being decimated in public conversations, even by his supporters and allies. But by giving Panu a megaphone, Trudeau has reminded us all again about the depths he's willing to take Canada, a once proud nation, in order to rescue himself from political oblivion. The CBC interview with Gurpatwant Singh Panu, a designated terrorist, raises several important questions. Should Canada re-examine its approach to handling separatist movements, particularly those that have been designated as terrorist organizations by allied nations? How far should freedom of speech extend when it conflicts with issues of national security? And perhaps most importantly, what does this mean for Canada's foreign relations, especially with India, a key partner in trade, technology, and security? With the United States embracing the same terrorist group as intelligence leverage against India, Trudeau has elbow room, or at least he thinks he has. But as global geopolitical landscapes become increasingly complex, Canada's stance on issues like extremism and terrorism will be scrutinized, and not just by India. 12 bomb scares, 12 bomb hoaxes that have crippled 12 Indian flights in just the last 72 hours. Indian carriers, Indian flights have been facing a series of bomb hoax threats that have impacted a dozen flights in just the last 3 days. 2 flights today, an Akasa airline flight bound from Delhi to Bengaluru and an Indigo flight bound for Delhi from Mumbai were diverted after receiving bomb scares. In the last 72 hours, like I said, 12 flights from different airlines of India have received bomb threats on social media, on email, causing widespread disruption. A preliminary standing committee held a meeting to discuss this issue today. Government sources tell India Today that the hoax callers will be identified and put on a no-fly list and face arrest and further action, while a bomb threat committee will assess each and every one of these hoax calls. As for security, sky marshals will be doubled, while NSG commandos will be deployed on certain main routes. The reason why so many flights being disrupted right before the festive season is such a big deal is because this causes huge losses to airlines which are already bleeding. It's a huge inconvenience to passengers, and the airlines are completely overwhelmed right now with the huge passenger demand during the festive season. Here are the flights that have all faced those bomb scares in just the last 72 hours. The Delhi-Bengaluru Akasa flight today faced it. This was a hoax security threat. The Mumbai-Delhi Indigo flight also faced a bomb scare. It had to divert to another airport. A Delhi-Chicago flight had to land in a remote northern airport in Canada, very close to Greenland, near the North Pole, in fact. This was a hoax bomb threat as well. Dammam-Lucknow Indigo flight on October the 15th, that's yesterday. Darbhanga-Mumbai SpiceJet flight on October 15th. Bagdogra-Bengaluru Akasa flight also on October the 15th. Amritsar-Dehradun-Delhi Alliance Air flight, hoax threat on October the 15th. Madurai-Singapore Air India Express flight on October the 15th. In fact, Singapore Air Force F-15s had to escort the aircraft safely into land. Then there was an Ayodhya-Bengaluru flight, which was an Air India Express flight, also on October the 15th. Jaipur-Bengaluru Air India Express flight on October the 14th. Mumbai-Muscat Indigo flight on October the 14th. Mumbai-Jeddah Indigo flight on October the 14th. 12 flights in all of them facing these bomb threats. All of them have turned out to be hoaxes. We've got some related breaking news coming in on this. And the union government has just taken stock of this spurt of bomb hoax incidents affecting different flights from India. Government sources tell India Today that a few hoax callers have been identified and that the government is very serious about tackling these threats. The Intelligence Bureau and Aviation Security Body have just held a meeting because 12 bomb hoaxes means obviously there is some kind of an organized pattern of disruption. Intelligence Bureau officials have been seeking details of these hoax calls. The Delhi police has filed 6 FIRs in the bomb hoax cases in just the last couple of days. This is something that affects all passengers because at any time there could be a bomb scare and flight schedules could be gravely disrupted. Live now to make more sense of what the government plans to do is Piyush Mishra. Also with us is Business Today's Karishma Asudani. Piyush, to you first. The Home Ministry, Intelligence Bureau and other agencies taking stock of the fact that 12 flights from India have experienced bomb hoax incidents in just the last 3 days. Tell us what they plan to do.
Well, Shiv, one thing is very much clear that government is very serious as far as these hoax calls are concerned. And what we are now learning is that the government has found a pattern, similar pattern what was happening with railways. Remember that a couple of days back we were hearing multiple incidents being reported on Indian Railways where various things were found on track, and the government has now found a pattern what is happening with airlines. And this is why the government is very much serious, and every possible step is being taken to ensure that the culprits are booked and the strictest possible actions are taken. Sources have told us that the government has identified few people behind this, and the government is taking all possible steps in dealing this situation. You would remember that in the last 72 hours, around 12 such calls have been made. And what is more worrisome here is that, government faces a lot of challenges as far as identifying these people are concerned. And that is why today in the morning also, Civil Aviation Ministry had held a meeting with various stakeholders at around 9:30 a.m. And then after that, we also saw a parliamentary committee was also briefed by the ministry as far as these incidents are concerned. Now the top government sources have told us that the government is taking all possible steps to deal with such situations, and government is very much serious vis-a-vis these incidents are concerned. Shiv.
Thanks very much, Piyush. And I want to bring in Karishma Sudani of Business Today also in on this story. Karishma, it's the festive season coming up. A dozen such bomb hoaxes in just 3 days clearly shows that there's a pattern to try and disrupt airlines and, civil aviation operations. What are the airlines saying? How much does this actually affect them? And are they nervous about how they're going to handle the load during the festive season?
Shiv, while the weather disruptions and diverges do prepare them for these unwanted and unrequired surprises, of course, a bomb threat is something that no airline would wish upon them. And it clearly does result in a lot of financial loss to them. There are a host of resources that they do put in. It's the crew, it's the passengers, it's the engineering team, it's the fuel cost, which everything gets diverted, and in return it puts them in a lot of problem. As of now, we do not have the exact amount, but airlines do share with us off record that it's a considerable loss that they are facing, and more than that, it is the violation of goodwill. A lot of passengers do invest their loyalty in a particular airline because of the service, but with such but besides this, they're worried that if this continues for the next 10 days, then they may not have resources as alternate flights due to the festive season rush and the passenger traffic the footfall that will be assembled at airports.
Karishma, thanks very much for that crucial update. It's not just monetary loss, it's also goodwill. It's about a sense of safety. It's about commercial credibility. And it's about the civil aviation industry at large. Festive season and this air of threat about bomb hoaxes affecting airline flight after airline flight. We'll keep a track and follow up on the action that the government must take against these hoax callers. That's a wrap on 5 Live.